Hi, on this episode of Things That Matter, I'm interviewing my friend Bill Buffington. Bill pastors in Inglewood, California, kind of the inner city of LA, and he's going to talk to us about his own personal story and about the work that God is doing in the city of Inglewood and about the vision that God has given him to see Bible teaching churches spread out from what they're doing there. So stay tuned. Hi, and welcome to this episode of Things That Matter. I'm your host, Brian Brodersen, and it is great to be with you today. And I'm really excited to have my friend Bill Buffington in the studio with me today. Bill, thanks for coming.
Glad to be here.
All right. And Bill is the pastor of Calvary Chapel in Inglewood, California. So we're going to talk a little bit about Bill's story, his own life, and coming to Christ, and then getting into ministry, and then kind of his vision for the ministry in the LA area and the inner city area. So we're going to kind of just look at those things. So Bill, tell us a little bit about your background. So you weren't always a Christian. You became a Christian. Give us a little bit of that story and put it in the context of life growing up in LA.
All right. So I grew up, born and raised in the city of Inglewood, and so that's why I love my city.
Yeah.
And grew up there. Didn't grow up in a Christian home.
Yeah.
Parents divorced right before second grade. So I stayed with my mom in one part of Inglewood. My father would later move right 5 minutes down the street in another part of Inglewood. So I would be with her during the week, with him during the weekend, two different parts.
Yeah.
And I grew up kind of wild, I got into partying. I lived in a Crip neighborhood. I dabbled in gangbanging. I never liked to embellish that. I never did more than fist fighting over gangs. Yeah. And my parents did a pretty good job of really putting down the guys that would have been the OGs. They talked so bad about them being 40 years old, living with their mom, and so it kind of, I didn't get too deep into that, but I did get into selling drugs. I was selling weed and partying, women. I was just trying to have a good time. I was enjoying my life as a young guy, and no thought of God, no Christian upbringing or anything like that. And so God's grace, completely. When I was 19, I had a daughter. I moved into an apartment in Hawthorne, and a friend I grew up with, he got saved, and he married his girlfriend out of high school. After high school, they went and got married. Yeah. He moves into my apartment building right upstairs, and while I wouldn't really tolerate Christians talking to me, because most Christians I knew I could find the holes in their game, and I would just, you drink, you fornicate, I knew what you're not supposed to do, He was legit, he was living the life, and the Lord, there were other people that sold into it, but he ultimately was used to bring me to the place of realizing that I'm going to go to hell if I live like this, if I continue. Yeah. And I got saved, and I didn't want to play with God, so it was a radical transformation.
So was he verbally sharing the gospel with you, or was it his life, or probably a combination of both things?
His life gave him permission to speak to me, because if you didn't have the life, I would shut you down. Yeah. But no, he definitely spoke. He came, and I had questions. I would try to stump him. Yeah. The best thing he ever did was he came down with this book he bought because he couldn't answer my questions. Yeah. He went and bought a book to try to help him. He's a new believer. You know, it was called Man's Questions, God's Answers, and he just read all the scriptures about hell, and that penetrated my heart. And so he left it at my house. He left a Bible. He left that book. The next day I went to LAX where I had a little hustle going on, and a guy who I thought was undercover handed me a track. And so I put it in my back pocket. When I got home, I never seen a track like that. I ordered them since, but it says on the front, "What to do to go to hell." Yeah. And when you open it up in big bold print, it says nothing. Yeah. And it reads John 3:18, that you're condemned already because you haven't believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. Yeah. And at that moment, I was like, okay, God's coming after me. And now I've been warned. Yeah. And the fear of God hit me in such a way. I remember calling him saying, dude, I want to get saved. Yeah. What do I need to do? And he said, I'll take you to church Sunday. And he took me to Calvary South Bay, and I went and prayed with somebody and got a new believers packet and got rolling, and really went home and started making some radical changes. God began to work then.
Yeah. So you were 19.
19 years old. That was 1995.
Yeah.
And and then, I mean, within months, my whole life was turned around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
I love, testimonies to me are always so fascinating because, just the infinite ways that God brings people to himself, all of these different, they're so great. So you get saved, you're 19 years old, you were selling weed, hustling, so you got to get a different plan for your life.
Yeah, everything.
And so where do you go from here?
So the same guy that led me to the Lord, Curtis, he was working at a warehouse. And so he said, there's an opening, I can get you a job at the warehouse.
Yeah.
So there goes my first job. The girl that I was living with, we moved out, that I had a daughter with. I moved in with my dad. And so me and him the first year of my life as a new believer, really got to share a lot with my dad. He knew what I was and what I had been, so he got to watch up close, just the things that were going on. And started working and trying to focus on being a father to my daughter. I met my wife 2 months into being a Christian. I met my wife who was already a Christian, and I was like, that I'd marry her. I knew I just had to convince her I was really saved.
Where'd you meet her at?
I met her at LAX. She was on her way to a wedding, and I was at the airport, and we started having a conversation, and I talked her out of her phone number. And she doesn't like my version of how it happened, but I always say I saw her looking at me, but I got her.
So let's talk a little bit about Inglewood. Talk about LA. Some of our listeners will know. They'll be familiar with that, but probably a lot of people wouldn't be so familiar with that.
Right. So Inglewood, I guess it's hard to try to explain it to people that if you're from Inglewood, you just know what it is. It's I think for some people they're like, oh, it's inner city. But if you grew up in inner city, it's not inner city. It's my city. So like you go to someone that grows up there and it's like, it's Inglewood. And there's a pride to, if you live there, they don't even say Inglewood, they say Inglewood. It's a pride to it. So I love my city. It borders LA. So if you grow up there, you're in LA. And in the 80s and the 90s eras, definitely there's a gang culture, blood Crips, and so there's a lot of that stuff going on. There's other things going on. That's not it. It's not only that. But that's what I was wrapped up in. That's where my peers. That's where we were growing up in the midst of. But I guess as a young person, wherever you are, if you're going to get into stuff, I got into the stuff that young people in Inglewood got into.
Sure. Yeah. And Inglewood for me, I think you and I talked about this before, for me it was the Inglewood Forum was the place where my friends and I would come up from Orange County to go to various concerts. It was a venue for a lot of different things, right? Sports and so forth. But there's a long string of rock and roll concerts that I went to at the Inglewood Forum. So that was
they're still doing it.
Those were my encounters, kind of dive into Inglewood, go to the Forum, see a concert, and get out of there. So from the time you were, going back to when you got saved in 95, how's the city changed, or how's the culture changed? What's different today than it was back then?
Wow, even where I grew up, the streets I grew up, if you drove through there now, it looks like a pretty quiet area. There's not, the blood Crip thing is not it's not anything like what it was in the late 80s, early 90s, so there's still remnants of it. There's still areas where there's more of them. But if I go down my mom's street, like, you grew up here, it looks like a nice, it looks like a nice street, you know, you don't really see any of the stuff going on. So there are areas where they built up now. And so now that the stadium's coming, they're clearing out things. So it's going to change a lot more.
Yeah, so this is the new stadium that they're building for the LA Rams, who have returned to LA, right? Yeah, I grew up as a big Rams fan, and then, they moved to St. Louis, and that was the end of it for me, So, Bill, okay, so you're a pastor today, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that, but let's talk about the journey. So how did you, what were the steps, or, So you're 19, you give your life to the Lord, obviously your life changes and you get a new direction. Was there a point where you thought you wanted to be a pastor, or how did that all develop?
So initially I was thrilled that I was saved. I was really happy that I was saved. Yeah. And there were areas of my life that I couldn't get a grip on that seemed like the Lord was giving me victory. So there was victory over alcohol. There was, it was starting to make sense in my life. I started to have some focus and direction. My wife's church, I ended up joining a little small missionary Baptist church right there in Inglewood. Traditional, black church. I was serving. I'd be there 5, 6, 7 days a week sometimes. Just a young guy available. I had friends there, so I was making new friends and just taking my first steps. I ended up, as I was there, I really started to sense like, man, a real hunger for the word. And so I would read it, I would buy books, I would listen to K-Wave was a big, that was something happening in the background that I didn't know was going to become the front ground eventually. But,
and just for some of our listeners might not know, K-Wave is a radio station based here in Southern California. It's actually our station. We own the station and we broadcast all throughout Southern California. And it's predominantly Bible teaching and has been Bible teaching from the beginning. So you're hearing these Bible studies going on.
And uniquely, I'm hearing people teach through the Bible. And so I'm really growing and developing my own appetite for the word through that. Then I actually, went from serving at the church to, I told the pastor I felt like God was calling me to preach the word. And the way they do there, they say, okay, we'll give you a Sunday and we'll see. We'll see if the Lord's hand is on you or not. And so that was in 97, February of 97, I preached my first sermon there.
Is that right?
Yeah. And and so that was.
How'd you do?
It went good. I have the video of it. I mean, I stuttered until I got going, but that day changed my life, I definitely sensed that this is what the Lord has for me.
Wow.
The same book that's transforming my life, God wants me to know it so I can tell other people, so that he's going to continue to transform people's lives through his words.
Yeah. So you ended up though leaving that church, right?
Yeah.
And what happened there? How did that?
As soon as I got married, my wife and I were there, and I realized that I was primarily being fed through K-Wave.
Yeah.
At my job, I could listen to K-Wave at work from 6 a.m. to 3.
Yeah.
And so that's where I was getting my Bible teaching at. And so I remember looking out one week at my wife, who's a very intelligent woman, and just seeing that she's not getting what I'm getting. She's not listening to K-Wave all day. And the Lord really impressed upon my heart, you need to get somewhere for your family that teaches the word. You're responsible for that.
Yeah.
So I started looking for a church like Calvary, expository teaching where I lived, and we could not find anything like that.
Right.
And so I tried one other church. We were there for a while. I was almost going to go on staff there, but I couldn't agree with a few things. And we ended up being led out to Calvary Chapel in Downey. And I went to Bible college there, and ended up going on staff there with Pastor Jeff Johnson.
Yeah.
And was there for a little over 10 years.
Yeah. So, but there was something there with it being a predominantly white church that you were a little apprehensive maybe, or you were like, well, why do I have to go?
Right. It was culture shock. When I first went there, if God hadn't spoke to me, I would never have chose to go there. I didn't like the music. It was huge. The place was ginormous, big old church. It was but I sat down during a communion service, and the Lord just spoke to me that this is it. This is where you're going to be.
Wow.
And I would forego my flavor of music for teaching of the word. That I got excited about. When I got there, I think Jeff was teaching through Revelation, which nobody wants to touch. So I was like, oh, we're gonna go through the whole book. I was so excited every Sunday to go through a book. I'm gonna go through all of Revelation, every verse. And so same thing when I got to go to the Bible college. I was the most exciting thing for me in the Bible college. I took all the classes, but it was going through Genesis to Revelation with Chuck. And just knowing that, man, I've covered every chapter of every verse of the Bible, and I've heard them in context for the first time.
Yeah. So you were there with Jeff for about 10 years, and you were like the youth pastor, right? Yeah,
was a youth pastor there, and always wanted to go to Inglewood, but it was always never really quite the right time. But they knew when I came that was the desire of my heart. When I went to Bible college, that's what I signed up. I want to go do something in Inglewood.
Right.
But, God was, there was a ministry there that God was using me for. And I had no idea how much preparation the Lord was doing as I got to serve there. Yeah.
So then after 10 years or so, there finally came that point where you felt like it's time to go. It's time to go back to where I grew up, back to, my heart's been there. So how did that all open up? How did that develop?
So about a year before, there's a guy I grew up with, and he grew up in the Lord, but he had veered, out. And my buddy Andre, and he had really done some damage to his body with drug use. And I caught up with him through Facebook, and I remember him saying that him and another friend of ours we grew up with, all Inglewood guys, they had got together and were saying, man, we need to. They were wanting to do something for the Lord, but just not quite knowing how to do it. And so Andre said, man, if the Lord will heal me up enough, I want to call all the homies together and we'll come to my grandmother's house and we'll come together and you can come bring the word.
Yeah.
And so as the Lord started to heal him, he said, hey, I want to do it. And so he set up this meeting, and I still was teaching at Downey, but I remember going over and a bunch of my old buddies came, and first we kind of shared where we are in our lives, testimonies, and eventually I got to share my testimony and share the Lord. And just about all the guys there were like, man, we're ready to change our lives.
Yeah.
I said, you guys want to continue to do this?
Yeah.
And they said, yeah, we want to do it. Let's do this bi-weekly. And so every other week, Sunday at 2:00, we would meet there, and it was so raw and so real. It was, and
so were the whole group of guys, were they already Christians?
No. Those are mostly they were guys getting saved. A couple of guys already knew the Lord, but the majority of the guys were all brand new.
Wow. And
so that was when I leave a church environment, and I go here, and it was just like, we don't know how to be religious yet. We're just real. It was good. It was rough though. There were lots of arguments and debates and disagreements and heated discussions, but God was doing something. And so on Super Bowl Sunday 2010, my mother passed. We were preparing her funeral, and Pastor Jeff, he called me into his office and he asked me, he was comforting me and ministering to me, about my mom, and he asked me did I still want to plant?
Yeah. And
I said, man, I do. And he asked me, like, you're going to share at your mom's funeral, or where are they going to go? If you lead them to the Lord, where are they going to go over there? And I said, I don't know. He said, do you want to plant still? And he said that day, he said, if you'll take the step of faith, you got to leave. Because it was comfortable. I've been there 10 years. I got paid well. I had benefits. And
sure.
So if you'll leave this, if you believe that's what God's called, then we'll bless you to go. And at that point, what I wanted was his blessing. I wanted to know that this place that had been so good to me and my family, I wanted to leave right. Yeah. And so that day it was like, okay, I'm going for it. Yeah. And so we started looking for where. That was in February. The church plant started in May. And basically we took the men from the men's study and we added the women and children and said, we're going for it. Yeah. And that's where we began, May of 2010.
So you're coming up on 8 years.
Yeah.
As a church.
Yeah. It's 8 years, but the first 6 years actually. In 6 years we moved 5 times.
Yeah.
So it felt like almost like we kept replanting.
Yeah.
3 of those 5 moves were abrupt, like 2 weeks notice. School said you had to be out, and so a lot of times with those moves, you'd lose a group. There are people that said, "Hey, it's a great idea, you guys. When you guys get settled, let us know. This is just too much moving around." So a little over a year ago, though, we were blessed to find a building to lease, and so we have a kind of a solid place. That's been a blessing for us.
Something more permanent. Yeah. That's great. That's awesome. So what's the average week look like for you with the ministry there? What kind of stuff are you guys doing? So
Monday night we have our men's fellowship. So the guys come out and it's more of a conversational. We talk, we read through scripture together and we discuss it. We eat together. Yeah. On Tuesday nights, the worship team meets. They practice. Tuesday and Thursday daytime we have a homeschool academy, and those 2 days instruction is given on site at the building there. Yeah. On Wednesday nights we have our midweek Bible study.
What are you teaching?
Right now we're in the minor prophets, so I'm in Hosea. Yeah. Hosea 9 last night. Yeah. And so on Fridays, usually that's something where the youth can do something. That night's a variable, maybe a married couples, maybe a singles. Yeah. It's an open night. Saturday mornings, twice a month the women meet.
Yeah.
Then other weeks the guys come and do stuff, and then Sundays we have 9 and 11, and my assistant pastor, he does Sunday nights at 6 p.m. And that's the normal stuff for the week. And then if we add things. Last week the women had a retreat. September the men have one coming up.
Yeah. What's the, just as far as the atmosphere, and I'm talking spiritually, in the community, do you sense, are people open to the gospel? Are people looking? Where's like the the average Inglewood person? Right. Where are they at these days?
What we found is that as far as people, a lot of times I found more often than not, people are not against the gospel. They don't necessarily understand it. So most people have been churched.
Yeah.
But a lot of what we find is in your traditional churches, it's the same words mean something different, and so you have someone that's, I've been saved for 30 years, but you're looking at a life that there was never been a transformation, there's never been a turnaround. Right. And so probably more of that, you do have, you have some other, like any other culture, you have different beliefs that are false or wrong, but I think I've come up against that more than anything else, where people coming out of a word faith culture, and they believe they know the Lord, and I know the Bible, but I just believe it means some different things, and so
like with the younger generation, for example, are they like your generation, and going back even further to my generation, you had a lot of people that went through church, even though they never actually became Christians in the biblical sense, right? What's the younger generation like today? Are they in church? Are they just completely disconnected, unfamiliar?
Yeah, they're definitely the younger generation. They're burnt out on it. If kids that have grown up in your traditional, entertainment based sort of church, it's like, I'm over that. And now a lot of because of things that are available on the internet, that a lot of the anti-gospel things are readily available, and the kids are getting information that may not be all the way correct that they're running with, and so there's definitely a need to reach out. And the way the Lord showed me that we needed to approach it was, the community is made up of families. Our communities are made up many times of a lot of broken families, and so we start with the parents, and then we reach down to the kids from there. And so the guy that does our youth ministry actually had him when he was a youth. Pastor Gabe, and but just seeing that, man, we have to apprehend these parents, because a lot of the influence in the kids' lives is they're directly impacted by their parents' choices. Where they go, what they're allowed to do, what they've been influenced by, and so that's been a big part of the ministry, is speaking to the married people, speaking to the single people that have had kids out of wedlock, and really trying to help them get a biblical picture for the family.
Yeah. So you said earlier that, here you were, you're in Inglewood, you're going to the church, but you're getting this, this Bible teaching, this expositional teaching through the radio. Then you end up going with Jeff, and but you looked around for a church that was kind of doing something similar, but that was the problem. You really couldn't find one. And I think it's safe to say that, historically in much of the black community, there hasn't been a strong teaching type of a ministry, right? It's a preaching, and sometimes even preaching with, like you said, sort of a word faith kind of emphasis, but that just really strong exposition.
Right.
That has lacked.
Right.
And, my heart is to help guys like you see how we can get more, let's get more Bible exposition into these communities.
Right.
So talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, that's definitely my passion and my heart is just to see more. And even as we're there, I'm meeting other guys. I'm meeting guys that are solid guys that are, there are other guys out there that are trying to do a solid work for the Lord. And it's funny, one thing that the Word of Faith people do, they teach, because they got to get their doctrine taught, so they at least prepare people to come and sit and keep a Bible out, because your different atmospheres, one atmosphere is that, we open it up, we read a text, we give a topic, and you put that thing away. This guy's going to be going to town for the next hour or so. But the Word of Faith guys, they actually keep the book open. And so they set the table.
Yeah.
And, for more of a teaching ministry. But,
That's an interesting perspective. I'd never heard of it.
Yeah. So as we're going, and this is the one thing that, too, is you find that as people do develop an appetite for the Word, they won't be able to go back to some happy, slappy church time. They now want the Word, and so we're praying about how, from where we are, like, how do we encourage more guys? How do we train up people to send out more, more guys to continue to do it? So that there can be more and more. We got a bunch of guys that are right now looking at Compton and just saying, man, we're itching to get, just to take some ground over there.
Praise the Lord. I mean, that's that to me is it's such a great vision, and it's such a needed mission. Because like you said, people can have a church experience, but they never have a life transformation. And that's the bottom line of the gospel, right? God is going to come in, he's going to change your life.
Yeah, you can't be the same.
Yeah, he's going to deliver you from sin, the stuff that's wrecking your life, the stuff that's, causing all the wreckage around you. Right. And man, that's the need.
Yeah, and I think another distinction is the way the biblical gospel ministers to a person, that they're transforming from the inside out.
Yeah.
God, they believe, they receive the Lord. God begins the work of sanctification. It's from the inside out. Whereas a lot of people are learning to put on the externals of the phrases and the terms and the clothing, but that internal work never took place. And so eventually this thing gets heavy to carry. It's heavy to continue this act.
Yeah.
And it becomes very clear and evident at some point that man, this isn't as deep of a work as we thought it was, know.
Yeah.
And so really wanting to see the legitimate work of God from the inside out.
Yeah. Yeah. God's grace at work in people's lives. Yeah. Through his word. Awesome. Well, Bill, I am really glad that you are where you're at. And I'm glad you're here today having this conversation with me. And I'm glad you're going to preach for me in a couple of weeks when I'm going to be out of town. This program will have aired already. But so what are you preaching on? Do you know?
Yeah. I'm going to share from Acts 8.
Good.
And so I titled the message Direction for Today. And we'll look at Philip and just just the awesome ways that first the Spirit of the Lord speaks to him. Yeah. Then the angel of the Lord speaks to him. Then the Spirit speaks to him, and just how he was so definitive and clear and hearing from the Lord direction. That's great. And we'll be speaking about that, how to get clear direction for today.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah. People need that.
Amen.
All right. Thanks, my friend.
Yeah. Thank you, man.
All right. And thank you for joining us today. Hope this has been an encouragement to you, and just spread the word around and bless people with these conversations are intended to just be an encouragement to guys like Bill as a pastor, or just to believers in general, or occasionally we're even talking about things that people who don't know the Lord might want to tune into. So anyway, get the word out, and thanks for joining us, and look forward to being with you next time. God bless you.